Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to improve and expand your life, then do we have the Mind as Builder show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, the undisputed king and heavyweight of the New Thought movement, a PEN Award-winning historian, the author of Occult America and One Simple Idea, and the author of a brilliant new book on the New Thought movement and the power of the mind, Mind as Builder. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about the positive mind metaphysics of Edgar Cayce and how we can use it to change our lives. That, plus we'll talk about wildcatting for oil, the power of buggy rides, squeegees and the Matrix, why you don't talk about Fight Club, Neville Goddard and getting drunk on spiritual wine, and what in the world dressing like a drum majorette has to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome back to the show, Mitch.
Glad you got that in there. Thank you.
Had to squeeze that in there.
Yeah. Great to be here. Thank you.
Are you ready to shine?
I am. Thanks, Michael.
Woohoo! Well, so glad that you're here today. Before we dive right into things, how'd you first get interested in Edgar Cayce?
Oh, wow. It's a wonderful memory. It was during a conference that the philosopher Jacob Needleman was presenting at Cayce's organization, the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. It was actually just several months after the tragedy of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And Jerry, who I was publishing and editing at the time, had written a book called The American Soul, in which he was trying to get in touch with the deepest spiritual ideals of the country, not from a sectarian perspective, but from a perspective of meaning. What is it that's being protected when we talk about the individual search in America, at least in terms of the best of what America is? So his wish was to try to take a really deep dive into what the highest ideals of the framers were when they were thinking of America as a republic that protected the individual search for meaning, and how that reverberates through our society today, or fails to. And Jerry was delivering a weekend conference on the American Soul, and I had flown down to Virginia Beach from New York for the very first time. I had never set foot on the Cayce campus before in Virginia Beach. And Jerry and Mark Thurston, who's a wonderful scholar of the Cayce material and transpersonal thinker, drove onto the campus. And the moment we entered the parking lot of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and I looked at the buildings and the campus and the old hospital building that Cayce had opened in the early 1930s, I was filled with this indelible sense that love had built this entire structure. You know, of course, it was dollars and cents and bricks and mortar, to be sure, but the defining force behind it all, the motivating factor, the indelible reality of what was really there, was love that came from the individual members who wanted to found this non-sectarian organization dedicated to the study of the metaphysical and built and governed, I would say, in the same spirit that motivated Edgar Cayce. It was this spirit of neighborliness, of fellowship, of openness, of an attempt to really live by the beatitude ethic of loving one's neighbor, wishing beneficence on one's fellow human. And I just was overcome like I've never been before at the motivation and the sense of love that I felt I detected behind the building up of this campus. And that was probably about 17 years ago. And as I look back, I know that I felt at that time that I was going to be indelibly involved with this place for many, many years to come. And that of course, has been the case. I've spoken there many times. I'm going to be speaking again at an ARE conference on the law of attraction.
When is that? I'm only a few hours south of there. I've never been,
terrific.
But now I am beyond motivated. You've planted many a seed here, Mitch.
Oh, it's a treasure trove, the place. I'm speaking there on April 6th, 2018, as part of a weekend conference. And they also have a metaphysical library on the premises that's the best metaphysical library I've ever set foot in. Really just a world-class, wonderful library filled with things that you never even realized you were looking for and that just come right up to you as you're browsing through the place. So it's a wonderful institution. The new book that I've written, Mind as Builder, The Positive Mind Metaphysics of Edgar Cayce, is written among other things, as a fundraiser for that organization. All the proceeds from that book go directly back to ARE. And I have written for their magazine, written for them in various capacities several times over the years, spoken there many times. I'm now starting to speak and participate at the Edgar Cayce Center here in New York City, where I live. I'm part of a conference there called Mind as Builder, which is occurring in January of 2018. So Cayce and his legacy is a defining feature of my life, and it all dates back to that day about 17 years ago, where I just drove into the parking lot of that campus and was overwhelmed with the feeling that I just described.
Woohoo! So before we talk more about how that came about and the hospital that was no longer beforehand, what can you tell us for those who aren't familiar with him or his work about Edgar Cayce?
Cayce was a psychic and a medical clairvoyant who lived and worked primarily in the early 20th century. He was born in rural Kentucky in 1879. He grew up in what we would consider a very agrarian Bible Belt environment, very family-driven, conservative environment based in soil, farming, church, scripture. And Cayce, to his shock, discovered when he was a young man that, in short, he could go into trance states. Mm-hmm. And from within these trance states, he began to diagnose and prescribe cures for the illnesses of people he had never met, sometimes people who lived hundreds of miles away. And he developed a reputation as this medical clairvoyant, and people began to contact him from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, asking for diagnoses and so on. And as his career went on, he expanded from delivering medical readings alone to also delivering readings that dealt with topics like astrology, reincarnation, karma, numerology, crystal gazing, different planetary influences, different predictions and prophecies, and all kinds of things having to do with holistic medicine. He would also deliver past lives readings where he would purport to peer into people's past incarnations and perhaps diagnose neuroses that they were carrying with them into the present. So in this sense, as Edgar continued his work, and he died in early 1945, he became not only the grandfather of holistic medicine, because he prescribed many nutritional and alternative and natural cures, but also in many respects became the grandfather of the New Age. All the topics that make up New Age spirituality, or that people who delve into the alternative spiritual realm develop an interest in, ranging from Eastern spirituality to concepts of reincarnation to astrology and so on and so forth, were popularized by Cayce. He didn't necessarily introduce these things into American life, but for many people, he popularized these things. And in fact, as a case in point, he was probably the first person starting in the early 1930s who prescribed meditation for medical purposes, meditation as a tonic to stress. Of course, meditation existed for millennia on the Eastern scene and existed for decades on the Western scene, but Cayce was the one who made the first medical application of meditation. And today, with body-mind stress reduction and the various stress-reducing modalities, meditation and yoga are very common forms of stress reduction within the medical field. And that's just one example of something that began with Cayce. So that's what people mean when they refer to him as the father of holistic medicine, or the grandfather of the New Age.
And it was, you use the word popularize, he was in a sense quite popular. At least he had some very special, interesting people on his waiting list, even when he passed away.
Yeah, one of the people on his waiting list when he passed away was Henry Wallace, a personal hero to me, who had been the second vice president to Franklin Roosevelt. There were lots of celebrities, Marilyn Monroe, among others, who wanted readings from Cayce, some of whom didn't get them at the time of his death because he would put celebrities on the same wait list as everybody else. He didn't bump anybody up to the front of the list. There was a certain strength about Cayce. You know, he has this reputation as being this very warm, gentlemanly, grandfatherly figure, and he certainly was that. But the writer Harmon Brough, who worked with Cayce toward the end of his life and who I admire very much, and the Brough family continues to be involved with the Cayce work, Harmon made the observation that Cayce really stood 10 feet tall as a person as well. There was a great strength about him, a great resolve. There was a plainness of character that almost caught people unaware sometimes. So if a politician or a celebrity would request a reading, and this did occur, he wasn't one to kowtow. He wasn't one to curry favor with notable figures. He put their name at the bottom of the list like everybody else, which is why, the man who was vice president at the time was still waitlisted with Cayce when he died.
Wow. So let's talk about real briefly his hospital, because there's some amazing learnings about what it means to be a what it means to live in this world here right now. So what happened to the hospital that he started?
Well, in the late 1920s, early 1930s, Cayce achieved a lifelong dream, which is that he opened a hospital in Virginia Beach, which today stands adjacent to the ARE headquarters, that would focus on his holistic cures. So the hospital would admit patients. They had a traditional medical staff, and all of this was augmented by trance readings that Cayce would give, metaphysical lectures that he would deliver on a Sunday. And the hospital provided patients with some of the modalities and treatments that Cayce talked about in his reading, which included, for example, massage, certain kinds of exercises, certain medicines, both botanical and traditional, colostomies, blood treatment, all kinds of things that might come up in the Cayce readings and that could be used to complement or augment other forms of traditional medicine. So it was really a very unique facility that had both a standard medical staff, but also could allow the patient to avail him or herself of the holistic medical teachings that were coming through the Cayce readings, as well as the spiritual outlook that was coming through the Cayce readings, which was very radically ecumenical. Cayce was a Christian, a devout Christian all his life, but there was a radical ecumenism that ran through his teachings, and on any given Sunday, he might deliver a talk at the hospital on anything from past life regression to karma to Christian concepts of forgiveness to material on nutrition to material on stress reduction, whatever it was he wanted to talk about on a given Sunday. It was really a unique facility. However, it was opened just at the start of the Great Depression. And at the time, Cayce was really dependent on a very, very small circle of donors who provided the majority of his operating funds. And they took a hit during the Great Depression. He also experienced personal friction with a couple of them. And with the advent of the Depression and with the problem of sometimes experiencing friction with a very small circle of donors who fund your operation, the hospital had to be shuttered. And it was a lifelong heartbreak for Cayce. I mean, he watched his dream grow and be built, literally, from the ground up. I mean, there are pictures of Cayce at the construction site of the hospital, observing construction, the foundation being poured, the skeleton of the building itself being erected. It literally was built from the ground up and was constructed according to his specifications and principles. And it was a goal he had been reaching for all his life. It was a deeply cherished goal. And to watch it close after 2 years, and it eventually became a nightclub, a kind of a dance hall, was a tremendous heartbreak to him.
So, I can't even imagine if I had built something for my entire life, felt a calling, a passion, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and then to watch it shuttered.
Yeah, and he lived in Virginia Beach. He was local. He was right nearby. Not only did he have to watch it close, but he had to watch it be reopened as a kind of a dance hall. So you can imagine how he must have felt looking at this building that he had raised money for, that he had designed, that he had put his guts into, and just turns into some kind of frivolous space that bears no relation to what it was originally built for. However, there is a happy ending to the story insofar as in the 1960s, the Association for Research and Enlightenment was able to purchase the building again, was able to make it part of their campus and organization. Today, it's absolutely beautiful. It houses a health spa, a restaurant, classrooms, and a very, very highly regarded school of massage, as well as the offices of Atlantic University, which is a transpersonal-oriented distance learning facility, although they also have students who are there on campus. That's part of the Association for Research and Enlightenment. So today, it's actually a very vibrant, active building, with 2 accredited schools, classrooms, health spa, and a very, very good vegetarian restaurant. So it has a happy ending. They were able to reclaim the building, and it has many, many uses today.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
There's something that I find fascinating here. If we skip forward in the story just slightly, Jessica and I are down on Emerald Isle. It's the southernmost barrier island in North Carolina, and we are here with nobody. There is nobody here for the winter. Now, the few people who are listening are from here. I send all my love, but it's 50,000 people in the summertime, and it's a handful of us in the winter. And I imagine this is something like this barrenness, this emptiness, this echo is kind of what he was feeling like when he's on Virginia Beach. The place has been shuttered, and he's told his wife, "I've been tested and I've failed."
Right. That's exactly what he said to his wife, and he felt that absolutely. And with a sickness in the pit of his stomach, he withdrew after the hospital was closed. And you're absolutely correct what you're observing about Virginia Beach at that time. Today, it's a thriving city, and it's always bustling and it's always busy. But back then, it was more of a summer resort town. And during the winter, it could be a very desolate, lonely place. And, the streets at times could be covered up with sand that blew off the dunes and mixed with snow and sleet. And it was not a place that I think felt very bright or life affirming during these winters. And Cayce had to drive past this former hospital, be reminded of his failure. He got very lonely. He withdrew. He just kind of immersed himself in reading scripture, chopping wood, fishing, doing the activities that he had been comfortable with as a boy. And he felt a tremendous and overwhelming sense of gloom. However, this began to turn around when his son, Hugh Lynn Cayce, came to him and said, "Dad, what we really need is to do things for ourselves. The colossal mistake that we made," he told his father, "was that we founded an organization that was really dependent upon the whims of just 1 or 2 large donors. And as human relations go, if you have a falling out with somebody, if you have friction with somebody, your entire budget goes up in smoke," which is exactly what occurred. And Hugh Lynn, who was a visionary in his own right, said to him, "We need to be more self-reliant. We need to form a member-based organization of people who are interested in the kind of work that you are doing. It's dream therapy or reincarnation or natural healing. And the fact is, we can be as small or as large an organization as the membership contributions permit. We'll start at the level that our budget allows. I'll be the director. You will continue to deliver your trance readings every day. We'll do what we can to assemble a library of material on psychical research and psychical phenomena so that we have some kind of context for understanding the work that we're attempting to do here. We'll organize the readings that you're doing. All of them were taken down in shorthand and then later typed up and transcribed into manuscripts. We'll organize the readings by illness, by ailment, by concern, by psychological needs, so that if people get in touch with us to see whether there's some way they can be helped short of receiving a personal reading for which there was a long wait list, we can refer them to material on hypertension or grief or past life regression or whatever it is that they're writing into us about. So Hugh Lynn's suggestion was revolutionary because what he really foresaw is the organization that ARE has become today. And it's one of the largest member-supported, metaphysically based, non-sectarian spiritual organizations in the country. And this is what lifted Edgar out of his depression. This is what got Edgar started again, this idea of this membership-based organization, as small or as large as contributions would permit.
Awesome. And I want to dive into this a little bit because, some of the interesting things that he said is we aren't owed an income just because we're metaphysical.
Right. Right. Which was a wonderful observation. The world does not owe us a living because we're doing this metaphysical work. And that's an observation that other people have made in different ways in a different language. And it's very important because it's been observed that if you condition your art or your crafts or your project or whatever it is that you want to bring into the world, if you condition it on paying you a livable wage,
Mhm.
then that becomes, in many cases, a barrier to ever getting started. And it does get one caught up in this mindset of the world owing us a living for doing that thing that we love. Of course, everybody wants the thing that they love to pay the rent. Everybody's walking around to some greater or lesser extent with that wish. But if you condition your wish on that outcome, it will be a barrier. You will never get started. And of course, these guys have material needs. Edgar Cayce lived near the poverty line a lot of his life, and he did live on contributions earlier in his life. He had worked as a commercial photographer. I mean, he had streams of income. He had a profession, but they lived, especially during some of these tough winters, very, very, very close to the bone. And hunger was not unknown in the Cayce household. And when they made the resolution to see through a member-based organization, they made it without knowing that there would be any financial net there to catch them. But the important thing was just beginning in however a modest way they were capable, just beginning. And that really is probably the secret, if there is one, to taking one's art or vision into the world. A step must be taken. That step cannot be contingent upon financial comfort, however important that is. And I don't in any way mean to minimize it. But you have to take the step independent of that, or that really just becomes kind of a permanent leash on your ability to carry forth a project into the world.
Oh, man. And on that note, I want to go dive down this rabbit hole just a little bit more. You say that for an idea to work, and it must be executed with assiduousness and dedication.
Yes. You know, that is one of the great gaps in our thinking within the New Age culture, I believe. And I could be speaking more generally of the culture overall. But I happen to see this problem, frankly, a great deal in the New Age, where people are always kind of searching for their true path, searching for meaning, searching for right livelihood, searching for a sense of dharma. We're always told that an idea can transform your life. And that's only part of the equation. An idea must be brilliantly executed. An investor put it this way to me at one time. I was sitting in actually on this round table, and there was a billionaire investor present. And he said, there's lots and lots of great ideas out there, but more than great ideas, what I look for is great execution. I'll never forget these words. Great execution is much rarer than great ideas. Great execution is much rarer than great ideas. That must always be kept in mind. It's not enough to tell yourself, all I need is one idea to transform everything. That is half of the equation. The other half is it must be brilliantly executed. It must be executed with perseverance. It must be executed with excellence. We have a deficit of excellence within the New Age culture. Many New Age centers, for example, are poorly run. Many people want to write their spiritual memoir, for example, before having written anything else, like articles or essays. Many people want to be published in book form before they have written in blog form or in article form, before they have exposed themselves to an audience, however small, so that they could sound out their ideas to some kind of a public. The examples go on, and I'm only referencing the New Age culture because that's where I happen to stand. But there is a great deal of interest in self-development within the New Age culture. There is a great deal of interest in finding one's right livelihood. There are many people who yearn to be expressive, and I applaud that. But hand in hand with that yearning to be expressive has to be a great deal of responsibility and accountability and sweat equity. And quite frankly, knowing where the bathroom is in your center, knowing where the box of books are for the speaker that you're hosting, paying the speaker in a timely and responsible way, not inconveniencing people by making them chase after you or send you repeated emails for something that should have been done a week ago. These things, too, are indelible and chronic things that play out throughout the New Age culture from coast to coast. And yet it's also a culture in which people are overwhelmingly interested in the development of the self, in finding one's right path, in finding one's right self-expression and livelihood. You can't find that self-expression. You can't produce beautiful art. You can't produce anything that has posterity or that will attract a constituency unless you are accountable and capable and demonstrate perseverance and demonstrate responsibility, a great idea must be executed with greatness, or it is nothing other than a daydream.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And one of the pieces that comes into there, while I have a philosophy of kind, gentle, easy, good, I've
Mm-hmm.
also been known to work 12, 14, 16 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
because I want to get the spaceship off the ground and I want to get it into
Right.
orbit.
Right.
So sweat equity can be a very important part of this.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely vital. It's absolutely crucial. I once said to a writer friend of mine, there are two kinds of writers: those who write good books and those who sleep at night. And that's simply the truth.
Ouch.
We all want a good night's sleep, and it is part of health. And I'm not trying to be glib, but the fact is, many people who produce beautiful things do work these intense days, as you were just describing. It's a fact of life. Hopefully they enjoy it. If they're effective, if they're passionate, chances are they do enjoy it. I mean, I have had the experience, as I'm sure you have, where I might be sitting just any place, in a bus station, in a gym, any place at all, and I have my little computer with me. I'll flip it open, and I have been known to finish a solid first draft of an article in such settings. Sometimes after a night out, I might come home, and as everybody settles down,
Mm-hmm.
I start to, map out a chapter to a book. I love it. It's wonderful, for me. I once said I want to write more than I want to sleep. And again, I'm not trying to be glib. I don't mean to say that taking care of yourself, pacing yourself, sleeping is not important. It is important. But the truth is, any artist or any entrepreneur or anybody with a deeply felt impassioned goal, as Cayce and Hugh Lynn felt their goal to be the starting up of this organization, they are going to have sleepless nights, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's sweat equity, and that's part of what it's about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go from there. Let's talk about Spirit is the Life. Edgar Cayce, he did over 600 readings. He said in more than 600 readings, and specifically in a reading on July 15th, 1928 in a trance state. What did he say?
He said, the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, the physical is the result. This is one of the most famous statements Edgar has ever uttered. And his phrase, mind as builder or mind is the builder, actually appeared in dozens of readings. That was the inception of that phrase, mind as builder or mind is the builder. Mm-hmm. But that was the dawn of that philosophy. And in some regards, it's Edgar's whole psycho-spiritual philosophy in a nutshell. The spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, the physical is the result. In a way, that's the whole American metaphysics. That is kind of the foundational principle of New Thought. It's the foundational principle of much of our spirituality in the U.S. today, which is this notion that the individual is somehow a channel for sacred forces, and the medium through which those forces travel is our mind. And as Edgar said, the physical is the result. There's some notion in our spirituality, a notion with which I am in very, very deep sympathy, that there's a thin tissue of separation between spiritual experience and mental experience, that we are channels, we are capillaries of some kind of a higher or sacred influence. Emanuel Swedenborg called it a divine influx or a divine inflow, a phrase that was also used by Ralph Waldo Emerson. This concept is talked about very heavily in Alcoholics Anonymous, when Bill Wilson referenced the idea of a higher power permeating the individual. William James called it a conversion experience. Other teachers have spoken of higher energies. But this concept that the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, defines this whole equation that the mind is somehow a medium for higher forces of some kind, forces that are causative, that are concretizing in our outer life. The physical is the result. So that reading through which Edgar expressed that idea from within a trance state, it's beautiful. It's a whole philosophy of life, and it really captures, in the broadest sense, the American spirituality.
Thank you. And you said something important I want to double back to. Thoughts are causative. What does that mean?
That is really my way of defining the entire principle of New Thought or positive mind metaphysics. The idea that our thoughts, to some greater or lesser extent, concretely impact our experiences, our relationships, our actual day-to-day reality. People have different concepts and different understandings of to what degree that is absolutely true, but I don't think anyone of either a secular or spiritual bent would part ways entirely from that statement. They would say, yeah, it's a psychological truth. Another person might say, no, it's an indelible spiritual law. But all of us, from whatever walk of life we come, I think agree that to some greater or lesser extent, thoughts are causative. Those of us who are on a spiritual search, who are on the metaphysical path, might feel that that's defining of a very sacred law of life. Another person might see it as a psychological truth, but it's a basic outlook in modern life, one that wouldn't have been heard, say, 150 years ago. You could find ancient sources, scripture, the Hermetic books, the Vedas, Buddhist thought, where you'll find that idea expressed. But in terms of modern life, if you had said that to somebody 150 years ago, you would have gotten looked at a little funny. But today, when you talk about the idea of thoughts being causative, thoughts outpicturing in our lives, people very keenly and quickly grasp that. They might have their own interpretation or experience of it, but they understand precisely what you mean.
How important are our thoughts then?
Well, this is my perspective. I have written, and I believe that we live under many laws and forces. We live under physical laws. I believe, in fact, that we live under laws of accident. I think that if people live in a certain area where there is a war or an earthquake or a natural catastrophe, I don't think that correlates to their thoughts or their outlook as an individual or as a culture.
Thank you, Mitch. That's huge for people to hear.
It's profoundly important to understand, I believe, that we live under many, many laws and forces, not only geological, but we live under laws of physical decay. These bodies are going to go away, whether we like that or not. There is not a single case of immortality on the books. So mortality alone tells us that we live under many laws and forces. That is our experience, at least. Even if the mind is the ultimate arbiter of reality, which it very well may be, that doesn't make us exempt from other laws and forces. Gravity is a law, for example. And in order for something to be considered a law, it must be consistent. Well, gravity is consistent, but its effects are going to be felt differently based on mass. You're going to experience gravity differently on the moon than on Earth, than on Jupiter. It's always happening. You're going to experience gravity differently in the vacuum of space. If you're in the vacuum of space and there's not another object toward which you are drawn, then you're going to experience a vacuum. You're going to experience the absence of gravity. That doesn't mean gravity is not real. Of course it's real, but it responds to mass. So with the mind, there's all kinds of different things going on that cultivate our experience, that mitigate our experience of the mind. So again, we experience things ranging from seismic changes in the earth, tectonic shifts, natural disasters. We experience physical realities that are going to go on just as gravity goes on in the vacuum of space, regardless of how I, the individual, experience it from my vantage point. But these forces, in terms of the reality that we go through, are quite real. Physical decline is quite real. And I believe, in fact, accidents are quite real. I have never really gone along with the New Age maxim, there are no accidents. There's meaning in a great, great many things. And I do think that life is meaningful. And I do think that there is an advancing quality to life. At the same time, I would challenge the idea that on every scale of existence, including the macro scale, when people in the Philippines suffer from a devastating hurricane, that is necessarily meaningful in the life of every one of those individuals, or that what our brothers and sisters are going through down in Puerto Rico, where they're still struggling to restore power. It would be, I think, incredibly presumptuous of me to suggest from my experience in a home where I have power that they are somehow experiencing meaning from this. Let me go through it and then come and tell another individual what the meaning is. I don't like the idea of talking about things, especially these macro scale events or catastrophes, that I haven't experienced myself. Let the person who's been through war draw meaning from and discuss the question of war. Let the person who's been through 9/11 or some other tragedy of a mass scale, talk about what that has meant in his or her life. But I'm very opposed to the idea of ascribing inner experience to what someone else has gone through. The individual has to go through that. So my contention is that we live under many laws and forces, of which the mind is one very real, very important, very critical part. And isn't that alone fantastic enough? Isn't that incredible enough? We've all been raised to believe in materialism, and it's being challenged in all these different ways today, including those of individual experience and testimony. And the fact that I feel certain from a variety of perspectives, including but not limited to personal experience, that thoughts are causative, that's worthy in and of itself of a lifetime of experiment. It's fantastic enough. It doesn't make me necessarily have to leap to the conclusion that everything that's going on is the result of one mental superlaw. Although that may be true in some ultimate sense, we have to account for lived experience in all its variety on this plane of existence. And that is such that I think we have overwhelming evidence, personally and on other counts, that we live under multiple laws and forces, of which the mind is one very important part.
When you put it that way, there's a richness to life of it not just being thoughts are causative, because if it was just thoughts are causative, then in a sense, where would the fun be in that? Everything, you could dictate everything, and you're now playing the perfect video game with everything under your perfect finite control. What are you going to learn out of that?
What are you going to learn? And it could also be overwhelming in the sense that what if you had complete instantaneous memory retention? How would you sort things out?
Wow.
How would you generalize? How would you walk down the street just to get a quart of milk if everything produced this almost infinite, unending number of mental associations, and if every memory that you had were subject to instantaneous recall? It's a little bit the same if we make the determination that every thought is somehow going to be resultant in consequence. It would leave us twisting ourselves into knots trying to figure out how every experience that we have over the course of the day, and there are literally millions of them if you count mental impressions as experiences, were somehow linked to a thought. I'm not unsympathetic to that point of view, and I feel that that might be ultimately true, but in terms of the reality that we experience on this plane of existence, as with gravity, it would be overwhelming, as would be instantaneous floods of memories, to feel that our every passing thought and association was causative without any guardrails.
And it's one of the challenges. I'm not sure if it's so much just new thought or the challenge here in the West as we start to bathe ourselves in these ideas is a if every thought is causative, then I'm continuously screwing up if things aren't going right. And then we start to beat on ourselves for our thoughts.
Yes. And, I'm reminded as we're discussing this that Edgar Cayce spoke about this and said, yes, spirit is the life, mind is the builder, physical is the result. But Cayce also pointed out that we do live, and he spoke to this very directly in some of his readings, we do live very specifically in a material realm, which is one of several realms. And within the parameters of this material realm, we can experience illness. We can experience bodily death. We do experience different states of survival as well. But on this realm, he would point out in readings, the physical parameters, limitations, illnesses, decay that are witnessed are concrete, are real, are actual. They are not all that there is. There are also other forms of existence and retention of consciousness and so forth. But on the plane that we live on, material conditions are experienced as and are very real things.
Thank you. I want to go from there. I want to jump into your experiments that you have toward the end of the book, because I'm always looking for the how-to side of things for people.
Yeah, right on.
First one, can you tell us about Stronger Every Day?
Yeah, I conclude this short book with 3 experiments that people can use to test the mind's qualities and causative factors in their own lives. There was a French hypnotherapist named Emile Coué who was very popular in Europe and America in the 1920s. He died in 1926. And he was widely known for his self-help mantra, day by day, in every way, I am getting better and better. And people would make fun of Coué for this because they thought it sounded so simplistic and so cotton candy. But his method of prescribing it was very shrewd. He would tell people to very, very gently whisper this to themselves 20 times just before drifting off to sleep at night, and another 20 times just as they come to wakefulness in the morning. Very simple. Day by day, in every way, I am getting better and better. And what Coué had actually hit upon was that when we are in that state in which we're hovering between sweet sleep and wakefulness, that's a state that's called hypnagogia, or the hypnagogic state by sleep researchers. It is a time when your mind is very supple, very flexible, very open to suggestion. You have some degree of conscious awareness, and you need to have it if you're going to repeat some sort of an affirmation. But you're also very, very susceptible to possibilities, to surreality, to hallucinations. And Coué's theory, which I think has probably been supported by contemporary sleep research, as have some of his other ideas, particularly in the area of placebos. Coué's theory is that when you're in this exquisitely suggestible state, the state of hypnagogia, when you're hovering between sleep and wakefulness, the mind it's flexible, it's open, it's suggestible. It can be a period of reconditioning if you use it, rather than just kind of drift off into these surreal little pre-sleep dreams or visions. This is the time, he prescribed, to use this little mantra of his, which critics thought was so silly and so simplistic, but his methodology was actually very shrewd, very sophisticated, and showed a very early instinct for certain psychological insights that are being validated today. So that was Coué's program in large measure. Day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. 20 times just before drifting to sleep, 20 times just as you're coming to in the morning.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. The next one, the three-step miracle.
And the three-step miracle. That is based on a little pamphlet called It Works, which was originally published in 1926 by a Chicago salesman named Roy Herbert Jarrett, after a lifetime of study of metaphysical methods. Jarrett didn't actually put his name on the book. He just put his initials, R.J.H.
How many copies of it have you given away?
Rather. RHJ, hundreds. I give away hundreds of copies of this little 28-page pamphlet, It Works. I just gave a night of 3 talks at a center here in New York City called Alchemist's Kitchen. And on the second of the 3 nights, I gave everybody in the audience a copy of this little pamphlet, It Works. I have distributed hundreds of copies of this little pamphlet. It's basically a 3-step method to trying to use your mind to attain desires. And the 3 steps, roughly speaking, are this. The first is you have to come up with a list, a written list of exactly what you want in life. And you have to be unsparingly honest and mature and intimate with yourself about what you put on this list. It should be something that you really put some effort into. You should enjoy it. I mean, it's an opportunity to really examine what your true wants and desires are. And therein is the most important wrinkle. You have to be starkly honest with yourself, not just repeat to yourself things that make you feel good or you think will make you look good in the eyes of others, but be really stark about what your desires are. When you feel you have this list just about right, you should read it 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. You should write it down, carry it with you, maybe put it on some laminated card or in a sturdy little notebook. Think about it always. And tell no one what you're doing. Maintain silence. I think I joked somewhere that somebody said this is like Fight Club. No one talks about Fight Club. No one talks about It Works. Maintain complete silence. Because if you tell other people what you're doing, they could scoff at it or upset your equilibrium or argue with items on your list. This is your private, intimate experiment. You don't have to talk to anybody about it, including the people you're closest to in the world. It's yours. And then just express gratitude when results arrive. Express gratitude when results arrive. Of course, many serious people hear this and they think that's too simple. It's too good to be true. Try it. It's simply an experiment. Try it. Because the fact is, one of the things that people often find in this experiment is that it compels them to come to terms with their most intimate desires, which we think we know. But those things that are familiar to us, those things that we continually repeat to ourselves, take on a rote quality. We should immediately start digging where things are most familiar. So this is a way to start digging. Make your list, draw it up, work on it, get it right, read it 3 times a day, carry it around with you everywhere, think about it always, maintain silence, talk to no one about what you're doing, and then express gratitude when results arrive. That's the 3-step miracle.
How important is having some emotion, some feeling, some visualization, some sense behind it?
Well, the combination of emotion with thought is vital, is critical. These are emotive thoughts, emotionalized thoughts. These items on this list should arouse in you some depth of feeling, some emotional sensibility. Whatever you're doing, whether you're doing affirmations, whether you're doing visualizations, meditations, whatever technique or exercise you're using, it can't be thought alone. It can't be vain repetitions, as Scripture puts it. It has to be a marriage of thought and emotion. And I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very, very important point.
Thank you. So let's go to the next one, a definite chief aim.
A definite chief aim. This is something that you and I have talked about before and that I've written about. That is the secret key, if there is one, to unlocking every program of self-development. You have to have one thing in life toward which you are channeled with this razor-like intensity. There has to be something for which you draw breath, something for which you live and die, whether it is the pursuit of inner truth or whether it's something outward, whether it's something material. Again, this is why it's so important to be starkly honest with yourself. This is not about being good in some way that we think is passed down to us by other people's mores and outlooks. It is about what you as the individual truly want. Having a definite chief aim can unlock energies and passions and resources and focus and intellectual powers in you that you will never experience, that you will never feel, that you will never tap unless you open a channel that focuses you on one wish, one aim, one desire. It may change over the course of your life, but if you have an authentic aim, it should be something that's with you for quite a while, like a home, for example. Yeah, people's homes change, but the idea is when you buy a home, you're not, renting a hotel room. You're not embarking on a timeshare. You're saying, this is where I'm going to live. So you should feel that your wish, your aim is something that very well could be a lifelong goal. It may never change. It may never change. It should feel so indelibly real and so passionately felt to you that the prospect of it changing seems unlikely. And if you can arrive at one definite chief aim in life, and I write about this in my book, The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim, it will summon and channel energies in you, intellectual, physical, emotional, artistic, creative, that you never knew you possessed and that you never will know, and that others around you will not know you possess unless you have that one indelible focus. It is the closest thing to a magic formula that life gives us. It's so important to have that one indelible focus.
Is it like writing your own mission statement? Write a couple pages, hone it down to a page, hone it down to a paragraph, hone it down to a sentence, hone it down to a couple words.
Yeah, it should be something that you can document in a sentence or two. It should be something that's very focused, very clear, very plain. It should be plainly worded. Don't bother yourself with excuses. Don't bother yourself with feeling that there's some concession that you have to make so that your aim is spiritually cleansed or so that it somehow seems pure. Give yourself a break from that. Yes, you should have an ethical teaching at your back. Yes, golden rule and gospel ethics are critical guides to life. You should always have a historic, religious, or ethical teaching at your back when you're embarking on any metaphysical exploration. But this exercise is one where you should get away from any kind of equivocal language and just come to terms very deeply and very plainly with what you want. Yes, it should be expressible in a sentence or two.
Awesome. I'm going to ask, you don't have to share because we already did third step of the last one, which is tell no one else about it. Would you mind sharing your chief aim?
Well, sure. I'm willing to share it because this is something that I've now written about in my book, The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim. I talk about the experience of discovering my aim, and it is this, documenting metaphysical experience, both from a historical perspective and an experiential perspective, both in the lives of others and in the life of myself, and doing that across all media, books, articles, narrating, television, audio presentation. That became my aim in a period of about 14 years ago. And in the book I was mentioning, I talk about the process of realization of that as an aim.
I haven't read that book yet, Mitch.
Oh, well, we'll have to get your copy. It's a favorite of mine.
Awesome. So you have a bonus exercise in here, and I've got to know, why do we all want to dress like a drum majorette?
Right. Now, of course, I just used that as an example where I said, if you feel like dressing like a drum majorette, well, then go ahead and do that. It's based on a column that I wrote in Science of Mind magazine called The Psychology of Clothing. I think it's very important that you dress and comport yourself in the world however you want, feeling a sense of physical comfort, physical ease, feeling that you're presenting who you are to the world without a sense of inhibition can actually be very important, and it can unlock interior energies in you. We're always told that true change needs to come from within, but the fact is the inner and the outer complement one another. And who is to draw a really clear line of demarcation anyway between what is interior, what is exterior? I think we get too hung up on these polarities, personality versus essence, spiritual values versus material values. Where is the dividing line, between these things? These things are all just metaphors that we use to talk about different forms of experience, and I'm not sure that there are any lines of demarcation that can be neatly drawn in life. Life doesn't quite work that way. It's more like a Salvador Dali painting than it is like a Piet Mondrian painting where you have lots of straight lines and boxes. Things bend, things shift. And I don't know that it's even possible to talk in any kind of stark way about the difference between outer and inner experience. So in terms of outer experience, I think it's very important that an individual be able to dress, comport himself, conduct himself as close as possible to how he or she wishes in the world. That doesn't mean that you ignore the feelings of other people, or that you show up for a funeral in flip-flops, or you show up for a job interview in a shirt that says, "Warning, I break for beer." That wouldn't be taking into account the needs of the other people around you. It's not about being selfish. Of course, you need to be sensitive. You need to be intelligent. You need to take into account the setting that you're in, the people that you're with. But the fact is, I think that it can be a great help to how one experiences the world to dress and comport oneself in the outer in a way that makes you comfortable.
I love it. And you're always, just your presence is always challenging me to get more comfortable in what I wear. You've got a Doors t-shirt on. And for those...
this is actually Patti Smith.
Cool.
Yeah. But I did just get a Doors t-shirt last night, so you're very prescient in what you're saying. I literally just got a Doors t-shirt last night, but this is Patti Smith, who I love very much.
Very cool. And your tattoos are kind of a blending between the inside and the outside, what you've got on and about you as well.
Yeah. Many of these things are metaphysical principles that I love: the all-seeing eye, the name of God, the number 33. Buddy Holly, take that as you may. Neville Goddard, who's one of the great thinkers in the positive mind tradition, one of the most original thinkers. All-seeing eye, Archangel Gabriel, cycles of the moon. Yeah, it is. I guess you're right. It's very insightful. It's a blend of the inner and outer. It's symbolic. So
since you mentioned cycles of the moon, let's do a really brief segue here to Edgar Cayce and Mercury in retrograde and Skype.
Yes, Edgar Cayce, that's right. And they're all connected, believe it or not. Edgar Cayce did talk about astrology in his channeled readings. He helped popularize astrology. He was one of the primary figures in America to do so. And of course, right now, we are right at the beginning of a phase of Mercury retrograde here in the month of December 2017. It's in the sign of Sagittarius, which is my sign. I was born under Mercury retrograde, as a matter of fact. So I feel quite a sense of intimacy with it. It's a phenomenon where people will traditionally tell you everything sort of seems to go awry, to go backwards, having to do with communication, electronics, travel, and so on. And I think there's truth to that, but there's a deeper side to it as well, which is that it's a kind of rewinding or unwinding, which also means that you can experience people returning from your past. People think of Mercury retrograde as kind of tying them up in knots, especially when it comes to things like travel, communication, electronics, tech. But the fact is, it can also undo things that are currently knotted. So one must not fear Mercury retrograde. It is a natural cycle of undoing. There are certain things in life that need revision, that need reassessment, that need retreading, that need reviewing, that need unknotting. That's why, at least as I've observed, people or situations can come back from your past during Mercury retrograde, sometimes to settle them, sometimes to put them to rest. Things that are knotted up can get unknotted during Mercury retrograde. It can be a time of great revision and reflection. Anything with the prefix re before it tends to relate to Mercury retrograde, as our language goes. And of course, Skype has rolled out its horrible new platform that we're all struggling with, which is also a very typical Mercury retrograde phenomenon. Although the cycle does have a deeper meaning, and I'm very attached to it myself, having been born under Mercury retrograde, I recognize that transportation and tech snafus are part of Mercury retrograde too. So Skype, of course, blesses us with this new platform, and people all over the world are saying to themselves, everything was just fine before. Now I don't know how to work this thing anymore. You and I were supposed to do this interview more than 24 hours ago, and Skype intervened. Mercury's retrograde motion intervened, and we had to patch things up and do it 24 hours later. That's part of Mercury retrograde.
It's interesting that you say re's, because we had to air 3 re-airs in a row because we had so many challenges with Skype and with guests this week, with things just going pop, 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 pop.
Yeah. That's one of the facets of Mercury retrograde. Although, in a certain sense, it's funny. I can always tell when it's coming, when I have something that I've agreed to do on the day that Mercury retrograde begins, and you can't be paralyzed. Life has to continue. Life has to go on. But I found that things I've scheduled suddenly, change or shift, and very suddenly, and sometimes in such a dramatic way that it really seems portentous. But that's part of Mercury retrograde. As time passes, I sort of grow to enjoy it in some ways, because it does bring with it some spectacular and unexpected changes to life, to what you thought you were going to do, to what you thought you had planned. And again, sometimes things do need retreading, and things need to be reviewed, and things that are part of your past, or people that are part of your past, sometimes reemerge with a kind of process of settling them back down. Sometimes unfinished business or things that needed to get smoothed out can actually get smoothed over during Mercury retrograde. Things that were lingering can be returned to in a more reflective and settling manner.
Are there ways we should act, think, do, or have just on our minds during this time?
Well, I mean, in terms of surface behavior, I would say leave yourself lots of extra time for travel. You can't always avoid travel. You're not going to cancel Thanksgiving or New Year's or Christmas. You might have to travel for your job. I don't think that you can retreat from life, but I would get to the airport a half hour earlier than you normally do. I would check and recheck things very, very carefully. One time my family was taking a vacation during Mercury retrograde, and reservations that we thought had been made for 11 a.m. were actually made for 11 p.m. and it upended everything that we were doing, and we missed connecting flights, and all kinds of craziness went on. Recheck travel plans very carefully. Show up early. People often say you shouldn't sign documents or contracts or sell homes or sign mortgage agreements during Mercury retrograde. Again, you can't avoid some of these things. It's simply not possible to tell a loan officer, well, sir, you see, Mercury is in retrograde and I'd rather wait 3 weeks. You may have to act right now. If you do have to act now to start a new job or sign a contract or enter into a financial arrangement, just read the fine print. Just be extra, extra careful. So in terms of the surface things, I would just advise extra caution, extra impeccability, not retreat. And in terms of the deeper meaning, gosh, I would say just kind of give yourself over to the air currents. You're going to get blown around a little bit, and in some cases, you might get blown to places that you need to go. So just let that happen.
When's it end?
Oh, let's see. This one ends December 21st, 22nd. It's a 3-week cycle. It's slightly longer than some of the others, but you'll feel it.
Very, very cool. So I want to go into a real brief meditation.
Oh, I meant to say slightly shorter. Excuse me, slightly shorter than some of the others. See, that's a very Mercury retrograde thing. I had to retread my statement.
I like it. So you've retreaded. We're retraining, and I wonder if you have, before we dive into a short meditation, any last words of wisdom that you want to share with people around the topic today?
Well, I would simply say that if you get into studying Edgar Cayce, you're going to find yourself with a feast of different topics and ideas. But the thing that sits behind those ideas, the foundational power of Cayce as a source of ideas, was his own personal goodness, He was a man who was so dedicated to understanding and trying to determine whether the concepts coming through his channeled readings were good, whether they squared with gospel ethics. He reread scripture from cover to cover once a year for every year of his adult life. It was profoundly important to him that whether he was dealing with topics that seemed to go beyond the boundaries of scripture, such as reincarnation, astrology, karma, and so forth and so on, that they be able to be seen as ethically congruent with scripture. So Cayce is a wonderful place to explore all kinds of different medical ideas, all kinds of different metaphysical ideas, all kinds of different mystical ideas, because the source behind these ideas was a man of true goodness and gravity. And I think that is what has given his name its posterity.
Thank you. And I wasn't planning on going here, but it kind of brings us full circle, which is, since we were talking about his son earlier, he was from a different time, but what was his philosophy with kids, or what can we take away for parents and kids?
Oh, well, Cayce was probably in many ways a very traditional Southern dad who would, teach his kids to fish and hunt and read scripture. He was a Sunday school teacher. In many regards, he was a very, very traditional middle-class guy. He would teach Sunday school, but then he would go home at night and give a trance reading that dealt with reincarnation. And, that may remind your listeners of some of their own lives.
Thank you. So would you have a brief meditation you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Sure. Well, we are conducting this interview, and many of us are hearing this interview during a period of Mercury retrograde in December of 2017. I think a very powerful period of Mercury retrograde. And what is it that we would like to re-experience, retread, re-encounter, re-envision at this time of our lives? What would we like to come to a different sense of meaning of, a different sense of perspective on, a different realization of? Is there an incident, a relationship, an event, a decision that bears revisiting in a constructive manner? And not just revisiting, but seeing in a new way, gaining a new, fuller, better, broader perspective on. Mercury retrograde is a wonderful, wonderful time for any kind of revising or revisiting. And sometimes these things will be brought to us. They will come to us in ways that we couldn't have foreseen, but are timed to bring us back to something that we are ready to re-encounter and resolve. And if there's something that you have in mind that you want to revisit, resolve, reconsider in your life in a really true and constructive way, this is a wonderful time of year in which to attempt that. Let yourself come back to something that you want to constructively reconsider, and let Mercury retrograde at this time of year undo a knot for you.
Woohoo!
All right.
Mitch, it is always fantastic on the show, having you on the show. I cannot thank you
Thank you.
enough. You
Likewise.
gave such. Everybody, I want you to get the book. I want you to dive into Edgar Cayce. Small homework assignment here. And as well, you gave such a wealth of information today that people can take action on. So I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we hope to have you back to talk about the new year and all things envisioning or re-envisioning for the new year.
Right on.
So
Right
for
on.
everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Mind as Builder. Mitch, where can they get it?
Just anywhere books are sold. And you can also go to my website, mitchhorowitz.com. There are lots of links and things there to check out.
So get Mind as Builder and begin building your physical world today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Mitch.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!